Hi, everyone, and welcome to Fresh from the Studio, the first one of 2025. We are thrilled to have 4 artists today presenting with us. Each artist will have a 10-minute presentation. During the presentation, you are welcome to put any comments or questions in the chat. And after all 4 artists have presented, we'll come back and have a short discussion and address any of your comments. So feel free to use the chat and we'll get started in just a minute. We have Aimée Everett, Natasha Kanevski, Andrea La Valleur-Purvis, and Georgie Miller with us today. And I believe we're starting with Natasha.
Okay, let me unmute myself and start my presentation. Okay. Just a second. I need to share it. Here we go. Let me tell you if you can see it.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great. So, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Natasha Kanevski, and I am Belarus born and raised Israeli-American. I know it's long, but it is what it is. And now I live in Cedar Park for the last 5 years. I work with clay. And as you can see, I work monochromatically, to allow attention to concentrate on texture and composition. In general, in my art, as I understand it, I want to show different ways of being we people oscillate between, during our life. And most importantly, I want to convey that harmony comes from embracing imperfection. So this is my motto, embracing imperfection. Hi, I'm Natasha, I'm a recovering perfectionist. It's not that easy, but it's work in progress. Yeah, and the main idea now currently on my recent series is to describe a sensation of harmonious and joyful movement, the feeling of letting go, an attempt to get rid of our limitations. And let me tell you, we all have our limitations, starting with our mind and body. We all live in a kind of very much mortal and not always healthy body, right? We were born in a specific time, specific country, into specific religion or cultural identity, and it just happened to us. It wasn't our choice. And in general, our reality beyond our knowledge. So we feel it. We are simple, we are imperfect, we are impermanent, and we know it. So that's why my sculptured elements in every work are simplified, let's say. And every sculptured element represents a person. Okay, as you can see, I incorporate a lot of them in my works. And so the people in my sculptures, I want them to be, to look similar, but different. Our differences are overrated. I made this observation as I am a product of 2 different nations and as a result of 2 immigrations I've done as an adult. But we do have our, we're not identical. So that's why my sculptured elements, I don't want them to look like your glazed cup of tea or to look like they were made in mass production. I want them to show their character, their texture. So I want them to look rough, but in a way that this rough texture emphasizes their gentleness, tenderness. I deliberately leave my fingerprints. I create those folds and the cracks as, they represent our story, different experiences we walk through in our life. So hopefully that explains why my elements in my sculptures look the way they are. Now you probably wonder why it's circles, so I'll get to it. So I currently work in 3 series, and each series focuses on different states of mind. Like I said in the beginning, I oscillate between these 3 states of mind constantly. So I'm coming back to the first series, second and third, back and forth. So the first series, the connection series, and then the desire to be in control series. And now, like a year ago, I started this whimsical impermanence series. Here are some examples of the connection series. For me, it explains the ideal state of mind for me. I would like to stay there longer. It highlights the beauty of human fragility and the power found in unity. That's why circles. So, as I understand it, when we choose to focus on our shared humanity instead on our differences, so our connection can be very harmonious. So this is what I'm talking here about in this series. And, to convey the circles to convey the feeling of completeness. But as a humanity or as a community or as a single individual, we never stay long in this ideal state of mind. Something happens inevitably and we move out of this state of mind to something else. And for me, what happened is what triggers a different, more aggressive state of mind is war in Ukraine. My father was born in Ukraine, and then the war in Israel, and I'm an Israeli. So you see that my sculptured elements grew spiky. This is how I started the desire to be in control series. I mean, they grew long and spiky, like they're trying to reach out and invade someone else's inner space. So overall, sculptures look like self-defense, like aggression. And let me tell you, this situation, the state of mind is very tiresome. So at some point, I just ask myself, how do I heal? What would happen if we as a community, how do we get rid of those desires to control situation? How do we move forward? And instead, how do we, we always have this need in direction. So how we get rid of it? How do we embrace the unexpected and the unknown? So this is how I kind of started this new series called Whimsical Impermanence. This is the second slide with some more examples. And here my elements are no longer spiky and they are arranged in spontaneous flow, to convey the feeling, sensation of harmonious and joyful movements, the feeling of letting go. And here are some sketches that I did. Hopefully I will maybe find a venue to implement it. It's supposed to be a long wall with different pieces that are arranged as spontaneous flow, something like that. And also what's important to say about my work, my body of work, is that I work in 3 mediums: canvases, wall installations directly into the wall, and then how many more minutes do I have? And then and then hanging installations. It's something that I hope to work. What you see here, it's a sketch. I did a couple of sketches of a couple of works, and I hope to do them. This is my plan. So when I choose to work on canvas, what I kind of want to emphasize is that how limited we are. We all live in our little box. Yeah. We don't want to, we're not ready, or we just cannot get rid of our canvases, little boxes, which is not necessarily a bad thing. On the contrary, if we accept the way we are, how we are, it can be very, very harmonious and joyful. And like I said, I want to come back to this state eventually. And sometimes I do that. And then when I want to be a little bit more rebellious, I kind of want to get rid of this canvas. And I want to go to a wall installation because it can be much larger, scale has difference. If the work is large, on large wall, it looks differently. And yet another attempt to get rid of this limitation is hanging installation. So there is no canvas anymore. There is no wall anymore. Strings. I hope it will look good. I don't know yet. So thank you for watching. Hopefully it wasn't very quick. Yeah. Follow me on Instagram. Yeah.
Thank you. And our second presentation will be by Andrea La Valleur-Purvis.
Redo my share really quick. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I have a tough name. It's Andrea La Valleur-Purvis. I also am a multinational. I was born in the UK to an American mother and a British dad. And shortly after I was maybe two-ish, we ended up actually moving to Germany. So I have a mixture of three cultures in my very early days. And so I had a lot of fantastic exposure to multicultural things, different countries. We traveled a lot. My mother was a photographer and my dad was an engineer. And so I kind of had both sides of the brain, so to speak, as I was growing up. And I certainly now work in that space also. So as a kid, I was always making art. I was building things. I was the Lego kid. And eventually my family bought me a kid-size toolkit. And so I spent most of my teenage years making all kinds of things, and really just expressing myself creatively. So when I was 18, I decided to move to America, and I attended art school, earned my BFA in sculpture, and spent kind of my early years working with professional artists, working in art services companies. But I found myself at the beginning of the 2000s wanting to travel, be location independent. And this was, a time where the web was kind of becoming a thing. So I taught myself web design, and later when the iPhone came out, app design. And so I spent about 2 decades working across creative roles for big tech companies, working on digital projects, brand activations, and physical experiences. But while that allowed me to travel and live in different countries, I even 10 years ago sold everything and decided to travel for the world, and then ended up in Spain. And so always was dreaming about, I would love to work with my hands, work as a sculptor. And I just couldn't figure out how to reconcile all of that back then. But I think that's part of the artist journey, is we spend time working through our creative challenges as well as life challenges. And for me, they ended up coming together at the end of the pandemic. I was living in Barcelona, and I was really ready to just own a house and fulfill this dream of having a studio practice. And so I moved from Barcelona to Waco, and now I have a house, and I have a 1,000-square-foot studio with amazing support of a master metalsmith, and I get to work on my sculptural creations. So here's a picture of me working in the studio, and today, my work is still very much influenced by the things that inspired me during my travels. Here is an example of a public art project I worked on for the city of Waco a couple of years ago. So something that inspired me as part of my travels was I always gravitated to the side streets, architectural, amazing architectural buildings, especially in Barcelona and all over Spain, really. I loved going to galleries and sculpture parks, and I would notice the little things that most people didn't. It would be the steelworks on windows and doors. It would be patterns in street furniture, in city infrastructure. So those types of things always interested me. Patterns, abstract shapes, a lot of geometry, Bauhaus, big fan, which that aesthetic also, actually looking back, lived in my digital design practice as well. And so this particular project was a 6-piece sculptural light project that was mounted under a highway bridge. If you've ever been to Waco, it is between Baylor and the beginning of downtown. And so the ask of this work by the city was to come up with 6 different narratives that tied back to how Waco showed up in the world. And as a fairly new person to Waco at the time, I dove into research things that Waco is known for in the world. And while there are many things, I chose to highlight the diversity of the creative community here, the beautiful natural landscape and research areas that are actually connected to Baylor and other natural farming spaces, and as well as the beverage industry, which is really well represented here between Dr. Pepper and Big Red was also made here in the 50s, as well as a whiskey distillery and some other Coca-Cola that has had their time here in Waco. So part of my work, I want to show you some of the works from the studio side. So here you can see the work in progress on the left. I use metal in most of my work. So a combination of actually using modern fabrication tools like CNC machines, all kinds of different mixed tools you can see kind of in the background to help me bend the steel. These pieces, some of them were hand cut. This is probably the 2 of the most laborious versions of this project, where because I was working with an existing curved structure, we had to form the materials to it. And unfortunately, they were not perfectly engineered. And so none of the panels were exactly the same. So we had to do everything manually. But the great thing that came out of this project is that I made a really great new friend, Morgan, who did the other 3 sculptures. All right, moving on to, actually, the great thing about this project too is that it is a public installation, so many people see it during the daytime, but also the nighttime allows for just a completely different take on the space. And so I really just love how the light projects the different shadows at different times of the day. The city also activates this space during Baylor games. And so there are other digital lights that are activated when those things happen. And so throughout the year, there might be different color schemes depending on how they want to activate the space. All right, this takes me back to my childhood. This was an artwork that I did when I was maybe 5 or 6. And this, in fact, inspired the next 2 projects that I want to show you. And so from those shapes, I created a series of works where I used the same kind of major components and built different compositions with it. So this one, you'll also notice my titles are very much drawn to the things that I'm working through in my personal life. I also deal a lot with connection, resilience. I read a lot about self-development and kind of finding myself where I connect to in the world. And so things like songs and books or things that people say, just I kind of have a running list of titles that will eventually get assigned to an artwork. So this particular piece is actually currently on view in Georgetown in front of the Sheraton Hotel. This color is one of my favorite colors. It's an orangey red, and so I use it as a primary color within my work. And looking into the behind the scenes, you can see how I use a plasma CNC machine after I've made a design to die cut all of the pieces, and then I build the composition in the studio. So building again from the same shapes, I built another piece. This is a 7-foot sculpture. I love connecting and letting people actually touch my artwork, which is something that I always hated when I went to museums as a kid. I want people to engage with my work, not just look at it. And so this piece, the upper part, is kinetic. It can be manually moved around to change the composition. So every time you see it, you can see a new perspective. The wind also makes this particular one move. And then also the sun casts the shadow on the ground. And so this picture is actually from Austin Studio Tours this last year. And This was maybe taken at 10, and throughout the day, the shadow moved and just caused a different composition, as well as the tree shadows. You can see a little bit. And so all of those things, you don't get to experience that when it's in the studio. And it's really just fun to see how a piece of artwork kind of reflects back into its placed environment. So some behind the scenes on this. One of the things that I learned during my design practice is to prototype. So I will oftentimes make a paper or cardboard prototype of my idea, fairly rudimentary, but it allows me to kind of try out some things. And then the center picture is of the actual pieces. And then the right picture you can see is an assembled version and doing all the functional tests before it was painted. At the end of last year, I was inspired to make something for the Christmas time period. And so I was looking through some art history books, and I was just really inspired by one of Matisse's last works, which was a stained glass window done for a church that was titled Nuit de Noël, which is a Christmas Eve. And so the arced structure is inspired by him. He also used stars in the upper composition, but then I pulled in all of my own shapes and inspired by different things that I either use in my existing work. And then the right side picture shows you that this turned out to be a 12-foot sculpture, and everything is hand cut. And working alone on a 12-foot sculpture is challenging. I called Morgan a lot to help me turn it this way or that way. And I ended up building it in a way that it can come apart in a couple of different places so it can be transported. And here's the behind the scenes on that. So you can see me working on the ground initially with the paper prototypes. I then project, in this case, onto the steel, where I then traced everything, and then I hand cut it with this really cool extension tool that I have for my drill. All right, so my current project is actually a commission that I'm doing for a school. It's a 15-foot suspended sculptural chandelier. The project was for a high school where students were encouraged to come up with a creative idea for a new gym building. And after they've done their early prototype, the teacher approached me to bring the concept to life and giving me the opportunity to be inspired by what they came up with, but really bringing my aesthetic into the mix. And because I love movement and I very much love Alexander Calder, I thought this space really gave me the opportunity to create a mobile aspect. Because unfortunately, this piece it's suspended. We intentionally focused on making sure kids cannot jump and touch it. So I still wanted kinetic movement. And so the way that I imagine that working is there is an upper window and a ground level entry. And so maybe a 25-foot space. And so there will be a kinetic movement by walking. And so as people walk through the space and the airflow has the opportunity to influence the sculpture at certain points without it going completely wild, because there's also air conditioning ducts that we have to deal with. But ultimately, it serves a function as a light, a secondary light, but also incorporates the school mascot, which is a raven, adapted into my abstract design language, and with some just delightful curiosity and movement as people walk through it. So hopefully every time they see it, whether walking through or looking through the second story window, they will see a different version of this light. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present my work. If you want to connect with me, you can search my very long name on the interwebs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Aimée Everett.
Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. All right. My name is Aimée Everett. I am an artist. People normally say painter, but I say artist because, as you'll see throughout my work, I kind of find whatever medium works for me. At that time, I haven't gotten into sculpture yet, but I won't say never. All right. So I am originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. It has left a mark on me that is in everything that I do, music, the way I cook, the way I talk, everything. And so color is a big part of my life, my work, my study. And so I grew up Catholic, and I don't go to Catholic church anymore, but as a child, the thing that I remember the most is the opulence. Like there's gold everywhere, all of the hues are deep. It's just going to church is just this ceremony every Sunday. And so that carries on into my work. So this is some of my earlier work. I used oil a lot because that's how I learned how to paint. I wasn't introduced into acrylic. And so these works here in the top left, this is me working with this visual language, this abstract visual language. And a lot of my work is steeped into memory. Memory is a big thing for me because I think that it really builds who you are. And as animals, memory is what saves us, is what, how we survive. And so this is one of my first series. And one of the main reasons I use wood is because I was using paper and I was like, what other fiber, what other art, surface support could I use that will take color the way that paper will? And of course it would be wood because they come from the same plant in a way, right? And so I started using wood and then I realized, oh, this wood too is also offering me its memory by this wood grain. And so I love working with it because it adds its language to the work as I'm also trying to find this language for myself in the work. And with these two works here, they were my first like bigger pieces. They were 30 inches. And the piece here on the left called Cleansing, I covered that in a resin. So it has this beautiful like marble effect. And what I found is that with color, it's almost like this language that you can use that transcends verbal language. I'm a big art history fan, and also going back to the Catholic Church, a lot of the congregations couldn't read, so they used disguised symbolism. And so in that disguised symbolism was a lot of color, was a lot of how the figures were placed in the composition. And so I went back to that. And so for me, I just wanted to create these moods and these feelings with this work. And so that's where I went through. And I also read a lot of Mark Rothko. I love his writings. And so the light when demonstrating the truth, that came from one of the writings that I read from him. And it's like, the truth will always show in the darkness. And so that's one of the, how I got this like shimmering blue with this other dark blue in the background. And then this is within the same series. And I go back into this gold leaf once again, because I can never get away from this opulence of just New Orleans. And the first art forms that I saw were paintings of saints. And so I kind of, looking at my work, I realized that no matter if I don't go to church or not, I can't run away from that. And so this is kind of what I'm going into. And then I also use a lot of like found things, and I'm like, oh, how will this work in the work? And so from that Death of Supernova has been formed, I used reflective beads that are used in traffic paint. So the paint that's on the ground that reflects the light, they have like these little microscopic glass beads in them. And so that's what I used in this piece that has this like texture in there. And so I also did A Realm of Disquiet with Cage Match. It was my first time working with work that was going to be in the elements. And so I thought a lot about what would go great with being outside in the Texas heat and the rain and the humidity and all that good stuff. And so I found paintable rust. And so I oxidized the rust in the patina in a way that I thought was beautiful. And what this piece was, is I wanted to talk about just the anxieties that we have. And so these pieces are suspended by wires, and they're like kind of attached to each other. You can see here is me like adding it in there. And so over the course of this piece being in there, I don't remember exactly, I think it was about in there for like a month, the pieces would kind of twist and turn. Sometimes they would fall, so I would have to go back and suspend them again, which is also, you know, going back to how we are as people. Is like, you know, sometimes we fall, we get up, and we have to like rearrange ourselves and pivot in a way. So so this is the paintable rust, and to create more of a texture, I used copper nails. And what's really cool about this rust is that you can't determine how it comes out. So it just rusts on its own. So you're not able to control anything, which is fine for me because I don't work in a very controlled way. But yeah, and you can see in the top right piece how the piece from being outside is starting to patina and things like that. And this is the second one, and this is when I found a paintable patina and did the same thing. And as it was outside over the course of time, and added these more beautiful like elements to it as well. And you can see like at night, there were like some solar lights out there. So it gave us this kind of eerie, kind of shadow look to the work. And then paying reverence to altered memories. So this really delves into my memory work. So I found photos of myself over time. And once again, this is kind of a departure from the abstract work that I was dealing with. And so I went into cyanotypes. So I was like, I want to make work over and over and over again. And how can I do that without spending the time actually painting? So I just went through photos of myself and just created, I think at the time I had like 50 or 60. So I work in multitudes, and then I pick from those multitudes of what'll work for me. And so with this, it was easy for me to do that. And so I wanted to go back and look at these pictures, and in each of these pictures, I was like remembering a snapshot of what happened at that time. And so that's what this series was about. And it was actually happening at the time of COVID, at the shutdown. So it was a lot of work for me to work on, and it was a really great series to work on. And so here are some other ones. The piece on the right is, so my dad used to have a photo booth as a kid. And so these photos are like the little strip of photos from that. And so it was like a day at work with dad. And I can just, the memory is I can remember the chemicals of the photo booth that processed the photos. And so in this picture, I can just remember that. And then once again, it goes back to that church imagery. And it's also kind of, in a way, putting myself to rest, like looking at these memories and saying, I'm acknowledging you and putting myself to rest. And so these are a few installations. The installation with the red circle, I was able to do a residency with Future Fronts. And so this was shown at the Line Hotel. The piece on the left was shown at the South Dallas Cultural Center. And this piece here, as you can see, it's called Offering Myself Grace. And it's, once again, it's like, it's about how we go to church and we pray to these idols and we offer them all of this respect. And it's like offering all of that back to myself. And this is my most recent work. And I think it's one of my most personal works. Right after I had a baby, I was dealing with, I don't know if anyone else has had children, but dealing with severe postpartum depression. And it was the first time I was thrown into something like that. And so the room is in, it's 2 rooms. And this room is just talking about that like darkness, that loneliness that you feel. It's like you're at home with a kid, and you know, being with your children is a wonderful thing, but it keeps you busy, but it doesn't really work your mind. And so you can kind of get in the way of, you can get in the way of yourself, and you just overthink things, and you're lonely, and it's just a really tumultuous time. So I have another video to show, but this one's about conquering the dark, because the nights were long and I just would really love when the sun came out. And so this piece kind of represents that. It's like the sun is peeking through the sky and it's like bringing me like solace, because during the day, everybody will be awake so I can call people, I can talk to people, but just that night with those cluster feedings, like sometimes, I don't know if you guys know this, but a baby will feed for 5 to 6 hours straight. And so you're up from like 10 p.m. to 4 or 5 a.m. and it's just this nonstop feeding and you're just by yourself. And then to really show that anxiety, I used rocking chairs, but I painted them with thermal paint. And so when you sat down and you touched them, you would leave your print on the chair, because I really wanted people to understand this feeling of anxiety. So even the seat is painted with that. So when you sat down, it was just a mark of you being there. And obviously the rocking chair is like a symbol of, motherhood. All right. And so this piece is the Pisces constellation with the great square of Pegasus here. And it's under these stars I lay myself to rest, because as I'm going through this postpartum, I'm realizing it's like I have to put who I thought I was to rest, because she is no more. And so this is the constellation that my child was born under. And then in this goes back to paying reverence to the altar of memories. Okay, so this goes back to paying reverence to the altar of memories. And so, like I said, I just created and created and created. And so I had a piece left over, so I used it for that. And this is also the beads from the other piece. This is the pink room, which was the lighter feeling of being a mother. And then here we are now. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is my studio, and I'm just working away. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. And our last presentation is by Georgie Miller.
Hello, everyone. Hold on, let me get this going. Oops, okay. Okay, can you guys see everything okay?
Not yet.
Oh, oops. I don't know why this happened yesterday. 1 second. Let me redo it. Oh, now I'm frozen. Uh-oh. Sorry, it's like this wheel of death thing is showing for me. Uh-oh. Let me try this one. Okay. Still, okay, there we go. I think, right?
Yeah, it looks good.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Hello, I'm Georgie Miller. I am primarily a collage artist, some mixed media. I really love a collage on paper.
I was happily
Um,
Fredo's,
I am currently splitting time between Chicago and Austin. So my studio is my dining room in Chicago, but I'm in Austin. So these are my very important studio assistants that I thought I would show you instead of my actual studio. My dog Trouble and my husband Tom, who are very important to my art practice. So my art is, like I said, primarily collage. It starts with, speaking of, there's my dog Trouble trying to climb on the table. My art starts digitally with photos and patterns and textures that I create digitally or tweak from source photography or my own photography. And then from there, print things that print, textures and patterns out or print shapes out and kind of assemble them. So I explore a lot, in my medium of taking things from a digital to the physical. Sorry, I think he knows he's got some audience. So taking things from the digital to the physical, and then A lot of my themes center around indulgence and consumption. I'm so sorry. I don't know why he's doing this. Indulgence and consumption is the biggest two themes that I really explore. I do a lot of still lives of tables and meals, and then a lot of kind of big floral scenes. So yeah, so that's kind of what I enjoy exploring. And I'm also kind of fascinated by the mediums of like the intangible and the tangible, and what makes the mundane really celebratory or delightful. So I'm influenced a lot by kind of older painters. I'm really obsessed with the Dutch still lives of the past. I love obviously Picasso's collages. Floral still lives are definitely my thing. So my first kind of body of work are these photographic collages. These are all my own photographs that I've found myself really being obsessed with the textures and the patterns that we kind of see all the time, but maybe don't even notice, like building, stripes and grid points and the textures of a photo of grass or nature. So this body of work is called Pedalscapes. So I took a lot of those different photos around, in this case, Chicago and in Austin, and then kind of juxtaposed them and flipped them on their sides of what's necessarily expected. And I kind of would zoom in on the building patterns or concrete, and then like the colors of the sky, and all of these colors are pretty natural and unedited. So I think that's cool to me when you put them in a different perspective, how they can really stand out or shine. And then this is another work from that series where I actually collaborated with a nature photographer who took photos of birds and livestock and ranch scenes, and then I zoomed in really hard on them and kind of put different patterns together of like a bird's feathers or grass, and then printed everything and kind of reassembled into a different sort of floral still life, which I thought was a really fun way to collaborate, because normally I'm used to using my own photography. I also am really fascinated with newspapers and news media. My grandfather still reads the newspaper like it's the Bible, and he would always send me comics at camp and would cut things out. So I think that's kind of where I got it from. But I will, in these works, my newspaper petals, I will source archive newspapers and then, change their colors, change their sizing, and then cut them out and make, more delightful scenes. I personally, the news can be so heavy and really intense and serious, and this is sort of a way to, make things a little more delightful, make things a little more fun, but also kind of highlight things that, kind of like my other collages, that you may not notice. And if you put it in a new shape or setting, you can, make it more delightful or celebrate it in a different way. So this is another newspaper work. This was actually a commission that I pulled different newspapers from the day the members of the family were born, and I highlighted different things and kind of compiled them all into a family piece, which I thought was really special. And then this is the body of work that I really love and is super special to me. I've worked on it a lot last year, and this will be primarily my focus this year, but kind of in the theme of indulgence and consumption. Like a lot of people, I love food. I love dining, cooking. I get a lot of joy out of dining experiences or treats, and things like that. So I love to explore that and what that means for the human experience and what that means to each individual. I also look at it in the lens of death. I grapple with the death of my father from alcoholism. So I think that also supports the theme of, the limits of indulgence, kind of living a shorter life, what that really means of like those celebratory moments or those occasional moments in life. So with this series, I have muses of all types, but this is probably really small font, but I have a whole note section on my phone of I ask different people what their, last meal would be. Maybe not necessarily a death row meal per se, but just what their kind of ultimate meal would be. And I think it's so interesting that it kind of informs my work literally of what they say. And some of them are so specific, some of them are super nostalgic. Some of them give me kind of a mood or a vibe from their personality, or maybe I don't know them. So it's fun that informs the series a lot. These were two, my friend Jeff wanted a game night with pizza, and obviously my collages are they're realistic, but not really in color or pattern, and still kind of have that playfulness. And then my Uber driver actually said he didn't want to eat anything, which I thought was super powerful, and wanted this sort of serene religious moment. So these two I showed last fall in Dallas. And that just kind of shows you how I, cut things out and after I've made the patterns and things digitally, and then kind of reassemble. This is a large scale version of this series. This was 60 feet by 48 or 60 inches by 48. This is my grandfather's meal, and he loves ham sandwiches and his white wine, and he loves to play cards. And so, I just thought that I also think that this series is really fun when it is so large scale, to kind of put things in a continued different perspective. And then these are some of the digital kind of mock-ups I've been playing with lately that I hope to explore more this year, and I'm working on getting a lot of these patterns and shapes printed. And yeah, I think that's it. But thank you again for having me. I love women in their work. I'm so honored to be a part of this.
Thank you.
Nice. Thank you so much, Georgie, and everyone else who's also presented. I just want to make a small note that all of the artists we heard from today, I have their websites as well as their Instagrams in the chat too, in case you all want to follow up with them. I'm going to, for these last 10 minutes, open up the floor for any questions or comments that folks might have after seeing these presentations, which were all very fantastic. So thank you all. You're welcome to leave a question in the chat if you don't feel like speaking up, or you can also ask the question yourself. It's all up to you.
I'll go for a question for Natasha. Some of your works that you showed kind of different collections together. I feel like when we chatted before, you had kind of a size in mind. Could you share a little bit about that? Because I think it was rather enormous, and I'd love to get context for scale.
The size of this large
like an installation piece.
Yeah. Well, I did it, as an artist, we apply for different open calls. So
Yes.
when you have some specific space in mind, then you kind of let your imagination, grow. And what would I do with this space, And yeah, the specific space was a 45 feet long wall, approximately, 2 different places. Yeah, so this is how I thought I would do it, And I have currently I'm working on large wall installation in Washington, D.C. It's like 20 feet long, right?
Tall?
No, yeah, 20.
Tall,
So it's
okay.
tall, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
So it looks completely different when you work in large scale. You're like, you really start to understand what you're capable of,
And is the clay unfinished, or is there
I varnish it. I do not fire it. I do not fire it.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Does that make it more delicate?
No, not necessarily. On the contrary, when your cup falls down, it can break. Mine is lightweight, so it doesn't break. Yeah. So it only looks fragile. That's the point. I'm working on contrast. So it looks fragile and heavy. And in fact, the opposite is correct.
Amazing. Thank you.
Nice. That was a good question, Andrea. I actually have a question for Aimée. I was kind of drawn to your use of like kind of unique materials like the thermal paint, painting with rust, as well as the traffic paint beads. I was wondering how you came to find those materials, just your research behind using them.
I when I have these ideas, I work through the materials I have, and when they don't work, then I go and I just research. Like I have a library card, and I don't play with it. Like I will go to the library and spend hours, and I'll look for what's the most reflective material that I can get commercially. And so I'll like my studio's filled with things that people probably don't think that I should have as a painter, but anything that I can find, like if I see like a nail artist will be using some sort of like paint on a nail, I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm gonna use that. Or if I see like a construction worker, like anything that I think that I can manipulate for my studio, I will take it and bring it into the studio. Like I'm not afraid to use anything because I'm studying botany right now. And so when I'm like listening to, the lectures and reading, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Oh, I could put that in my like, my practice. And so um yeah, my brain just works like that. Anything that I see, that even like listening to these to the other artists, I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. Oh, I could do something like that. Oh, like even thinking about like Andrea's, the metal balls, I'm like, oh, I could take the wood that I use, wet it, mold it, and then turn it into a sculpture in that way. So that's just how my brain works. I think a lot of it is just how I grew up in New Orleans, like having to work with what you had. Because my mom was not buying me art supplies because she just couldn't afford it. So I had to figure out what I could use around the house. So my mind just tinkers like that.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense, especially like being from New Orleans, having such a like richly colored and richly textured landscape. I could see that as well. And that actually kind of leads me into a question that I have both for Andrea and Georgie, because both of y'all take inspiration from architecture, and I kind of just wanted to hear more about sort of what details in buildings stand out the most to y'all, or what sort of approach y'all have when going to a familiar or a new environment, and how you're able to take in those details.
So definitely when I saw Georgie's references of the really tall building, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Where it's more of a geometric grid, which obviously is more typically more prominent in modern architecture. But so in Spain specifically, or Spain, Portugal, some of these really, really old countries, even Israel, I just really enjoyed seeing what was possible without the tools and just access that we have today. So a lot of this took many, many years to make. A lot of it's a little bit more ornamental or more art/craft driven. That really speaks to me. And then in terms of like very unique architecture, think like performing arts buildings, museums that have a much more, I would say, thoughtful design behind it, I find very interesting. There are a number of architects that really push the boundaries of engineering, and I kind of work that way. And so my mentor always is like, your ideas are here, and the way you know how to make it is here. And so we're always talking about the gap. But I'm always the kind of person who kind of figures it out along the way. And in reality, my mother was a photographer. I take a lot of photos. I have over 10,000 photos from just the year that I traveled, and a lot of it was pictures of things I found in nature, shells, things on the beach. I spend a lot of time in countries I'd never been to that have a completely different naturescape. And so then I might use an element of that within my own work. So Georgie, over to you.
Yeah. I think similar to Andrea, I take so many photos, and I don't usually know what I'm taking until I get home and I look at all of them. Then I kind of notice the pattern of what I've taken, and that happened a lot with the cityscape stuff, where I realized I was taking all sorts of photos of not even just the buildings, with the patterns that they kind of make if you put them in one frame, or like there's a lot of concrete, like tile. I realized I was really into, and using that as sort of a flat pattern. When it usually, when it's in the natural eye, you see this like very large 3D structure. So I kind of like exploring taking something that big and 3D and using it instead as a sort of 2D pattern of sorts. So yeah, but I think architecture is always inspiring me more than I even notice. And I love juxtaposing it with nature. I also really just love putting it really close in something that's super opposite, like grass or water. So yeah, I always learn more about what I'm focusing on as I'm getting more of the materials, which is always kind of an interesting process.
I think one thing that you probably agree with too is just when you zoom in on the macro level of something, especially made in nature. I mean, I can think of like plants and herbs, and just if you get like super close, the shapes of things, it's really incredible. And so
Yeah.
then when like in my practice, I work relatively big. And so then I oftentimes will take the full shape or an element of the shape and really blow up scale. That's what I find interesting. And I have many collections of things. So I have a folder called Shapes, and there's a number of different things that live in that. Anything from a photograph of an object that I find interesting to, a squiggly line or a piece of an artwork that somebody else made, but there's like one little thing in the artwork that I just love and I want to bring it into my work. I love Natasha's glasses, like, that element is very interesting to me too. So I get inspired by all kinds of things like that.
Awesome. Thank you both for those wonderful answers. And as we approach the 1 p.m. mark, just want to leave room if anybody has any last questions, please speak up, or also you can directly contact these artists. I also want to read a quick comment from Holly. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed seeing all the art. Definitely echoing that sentiment. Definitely appreciate all of y'all taking the time to show us your process, what you're working on, as well as preparing these presentations. And I'd also like to thank all of our viewers today. Thanks for being along for the ride. And this session will also be recorded and posted on our website later on this week. So if you want to rewatch and catch some things. But yeah, thank you to Georgie, Andrea, Natasha, and Aimée for your presentations today.
Thank you, everybody.
You guys.
Thank you so much.